I rule
Every
the north,
empire
the
believes it
rightful
will
crown
last
of Egypt.
forever, and for a
Amun
while,
guides
Egypt
Thebes,
had every
not
reason
your
to
hollow
believe the
delta
same.
throne.
It had survived collapse before. It had rebuilt itself from fragments twice already, each time emerging with fresh armies and renewed confidence. But by the final centuries of the first millennium BCE, the strength that had once conquered foreign lands began working in reverse. Foreign powers began conquering Egypt instead, one after another, until the land of the Pharaohs found itself ruled by Libyans, then Nubians, then Assyrians, then Persians, and eventually by a Macedonian general who never even spoke the Egyptian language. And yet, in the middle of this long twilight, one extraordinary woman rose to become perhaps the most famous ruler in all of Egyptian history, a queen who spoke 9 languages, outmaneuvered Roman generals, allied herself with 2 of the most powerful men in the ancient world, and fought desperately to keep her country independent against the rising power of Rome. Her name was Cleopatra, and her death would mark not just the end of her own reign, but the final closing chapter of 3,000 years of pharaonic civilization. This is the story of how Egypt's long twilight unfolded, and how the last of the pharaohs made her final, desperate stand against the unstoppable rise of empire. The decline that began after the death of Ramesses II accelerated dramatically in the centuries that followed. By around 1069 BCE, the once unified new kingdom had effectively split, with pharaohs ruling from the northern city of Tanis while the powerful high priests of Ammonius controlled Thebes and much of Upper Egypt in a state that functioned almost as an independent theocracy. This period, known as the Third Intermediate Period, saw Egypt's political unity fracture repeatedly, and it opened the door to a series of foreign dynasties that would rule the Nile Valley over the following centuries. Around 945 BCE, a dynasty of Libyan origin, descended from Berber mercenaries who had settled in Egypt generations earlier, took the throne, ruling as fully Egyptianized pharaohs even while maintaining their distinct heritage. Later, in the 8th century BCE, kings from Nubia to the south, ruling the kingdom of Kush, conquered Egypt and established the 25th dynasty, presenting themselves as restorers of traditional Egyptian religious and cultural practices that they believed had been neglected, even constructing their own pyramids in Nubia in deliberate emulation of Egypt's ancient royal traditions. Nubian rule over Egypt was cut short by the expanding Assyrian Empire, whose armies invaded Egypt in the 7th century BCE, sacking the ancient capital of Thebes in 663 BCE in a campaign so devastating that it was remembered for centuries afterward as a symbol of catastrophic destruction. Egypt briefly regained independence under a native dynasty known as the Sate period, based in the delta city of Sais, which oversaw a genuine cultural revival, deliberately looking back to the art and religious styles of the Old Kingdom in an effort to reassert traditional Egyptian identity. This renaissance, however, proved to be Egypt's last major period of independent native rule for a very long time. In 525 BCE, the Persian Achaemenid Empire under Cambyses II conquered Egypt, incorporating it as a wealthy province, or satrapy, within the vast Persian imperial system. Egyptian rebellions against Persian rule occurred periodically over the following 2 centuries, occasionally achieving brief periods of renewed native independence, but Persian control was ultimately reasserted each time, leaving Egypt as a subject territory within someone else's empire for the majority of this era. This long period of foreign domination was decisively interrupted in 332 BCE, when Alexander the Great, having already shattered Persian power across the Near East, marched into Egypt and was welcomed by the population as a liberator from Persian rule. Alexander was crowned pharaoh in the traditional Egyptian manner, and during his brief time in the country he founded the city of Alexandria on the Mediterranean coast, a settlement that would go on to become one of the greatest cities of the ancient world. A center of trade, scholarship, and culture that would eventually house the legendary Library of Alexandria, one of history's most significant, and most famously lost, centers of ancient learning. Alexander died in 323 BCE without a stable adult heir, and his vast empire fractured among his leading generals in the wars that followed. Egypt fell to one of these generals, Ptolemy, who established himself as pharaoh and founded the Ptolemaic Dynasty, a line of Greek Macedonian rulers who would govern Egypt for the next 3 centuries, blending Greek and Egyptian traditions in a complex cultural synthesis that defined this final major phase of pharaonic history. The Ptolemaic pharaohs, despite their Macedonian Greek origin, adopted many traditional Egyptian royal customs, presenting themselves in art and religious ceremony as legitimate successors to the pharaohs of old, while simultaneously maintaining a distinct Greek-speaking ruling class centered in cosmopolitan Alexandria. Intermarriage within the royal family, including sibling marriages modeled on earlier Egyptian royal traditions, became common practice among the Ptolemies as a means of consolidating dynastic power and avoiding the dilution of royal authority through outside marriage alliances. Over successive generations, however, the dynasty was frequently racked by internal power struggles, assassinations, and civil conflict between rival family members competing for the throne, even as Ptolemaic Egypt remained one of the wealthiest and most economically productive regions of the entire Mediterranean world, its grain exports feeding cities across the Greek and later Roman worlds. It was into this environment of dynastic instability that Cleopatra VII was born around 69 BCE, eventually ascending to the throne as co-ruler alongside her younger brother, in keeping with Ptolemaic tradition, around 51 BCE. From the very beginning of her reign, Cleopatra faced fierce internal political rivalry, and she was forced into exile after a power struggle with her brother's court advisors. She returned to reclaim her throne with the crucial assistance of the Roman general Julius Caesar, who arrived in Egypt pursuing his rival Pompey and became entangled in Egyptian court politics. Cleopatra famously secured an audience with Caesar through a dramatic personal approach, and the two formed both a political alliance and a personal relationship, resulting in a son, Caesar Ion, whom Cleopatra would present as Caesar's heir. With Caesar's military support, Cleopatra was restored to the Egyptian throne, and she later traveled to Rome itself, a visit that stirred considerable controversy among the Roman elite, many of whom viewed the foreign queen with deep suspicion. Following Caesar's assassination in 44 BCE, Rome descended into civil war among his potential successors, and Cleopatra once again found herself navigating a treacherous political landscape. She formed a new alliance, both political and romantic, with Mark Antony, one of the most powerful Roman generals and a member of the ruling triumvirate that had emerged from the chaos following Caesar's death. Antony and Cleopatra's relationship combined genuine personal affection, as recorded by various ancient sources, with clear strategic calculation on both sides, as Cleopatra sought Roman military protection for Egypt's continued independence, while Antony sought access to Egypt's immense wealth and resources to support his own political ambitions within the increasingly fractured Roman world. Together they had 3 children, and Antony's growing association with Egypt, along with his controversial redistribution of Roman-controlled eastern territories to Cleopatra and their children in a public ceremony known as the Donations of Alexandria, provided powerful propaganda ammunition for his rival in Rome, Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, who used these events to paint Antony as having abandoned Roman values in favor of an exotic and dangerous foreign queen. The final confrontation between Octavian on one side and Antony and Cleopatra on the other came at the naval Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, off the western coast of Greece, where Octavian's fleet decisively defeated the combined forces of Antony and Cleopatra. The couple retreated to Alexandria, but their position was now hopeless, as Octavian's forces steadily advanced toward Egypt over the following year. Facing certain defeat and capture, Antony took his own life in 30 BCE after receiving a false report of Cleopatra's death. Cleopatra herself, upon learning that Octavian intended to parade her through the streets of Rome as a captive in a triumph, chose to end her own life shortly afterward rather than submit to that humiliation, according to the most widely accepted ancient accounts, using poison, quite possibly delivered by a venomous snake. Though the precise details remain a subject of historical debate among modern scholars given the limitations and biases of surviving ancient sources. Cleopatra's death in 30 BC marked the definitive end of the Ptolemaic Dynasty and, with it, the end of over 3,000 years of pharaonic rule stretching back to Narmer's unification of Upper and Lower Egypt. Octavian annexed Egypt directly as a personal possession of Rome rather than as a standard Roman province governed by the Senate, recognizing the immense strategic and economic value of Egyptian grain production for feeding the city of Rome itself. Egyptian religious and cultural traditions did not vanish overnight, and Egyptian temples continued to function, with some traditional religious practices persisting for centuries under Roman rule, gradually transforming and eventually declining as Christianity spread throughout the Roman world in subsequent centuries. Yet the political institution that had defined Egyptian civilization since its earliest unification, the office of a native or at least independently ruling pharaoh believed to embody divine authority over the land, was gone forever, absorbed into the administrative machinery of an empire centered not on the Nile, but on the Tiber. Looking back across the full sweep of this history, from Narmer's unification through the Pyramid Age, through imperial conquest and religious revolution, through centuries of foreign rule and Cleopatra's desperate final stand, what remains most remarkable is not simply that ancient Egyptian civilization achieved such extraordinary things, but that it endured, in recognizable form, for such an immense span of time. 3,000 years is a length of time roughly equivalent to the entire distance separating the ancient Greek world from the present day. Through collapse, foreign conquest, religious upheaval, and dynastic crisis, the core ideas born along the Nile Valley in that first act of unification proved extraordinarily resilient, and the physical monuments those ideas produced, the pyramids of Giza, the temples of Karnak and Abu Simbel, the golden treasures of Tutankhamun, still stand today as the most enduring physical testimony of what that ancient civilization was able to achieve, and as a permanent reminder of just how long, and how far, the story of ancient Egypt truly stretched.